Hey, folks. Well, I'm so excited to be here in this space and to join virtually with New York City and two fantastic speakers to speak about, for us to have a discussion about AI and the creative lens, digital media, storytelling, and the future of learning. So, we welcome two speakers. Terence, let me address you first. So you're the chair of the MFA program in Computer Arts Department at the School of Visual Arts in New York City, and you're also the director of the Graduate Center. So you're known as a veteran innovator in digital media, and you have over 3 years, decades of experience spanning animation, visual effects, and interactive storytelling. Your career includes contributions to iconic projects like Star Wars, South Park, and Spider-Man. And I bet there's lots of people here in the room who've seen at least, all three of them or some parts of those three. You've been a driving force in shaping how narrative and technology intersect in education and industry. And that's what we talk about a lot here in CITL. It's what do the students need to know when they graduate if they go for corporate jobs and such. And you work at bridges disciplines. There's computer science, there's design, film, and communication. So this is all about collaboratory research and curriculum development. And you're a published author, TED speaker, and you've always advocated for inclusive innovation in creative technology. Yeah, and Anthony, you're a documentary filmmaker and on faculty in the School of Visual Arts. How did you get there, though? So you mentioned that many years ago, you saw yourself like a university history professor, but you took some detours along the way, and somehow I was always connected to history, but you found yourself doing documentary films. So the film Colette won the 2021 Academy Award, and your first feature, The Camden 28, was nominated for Writers Guild of America Award. I'm also really intrigued by this. You directed history-driven films on the Kennedy assassination.
Yeah. You can say
You're 100% sure that Oswald acted alone. You did your research. You did research.
Yes. Don't be ashamed to say that. That's okay.
Yeah, it's all about truth, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And then also about Pearl Harbor. Again, no conspiracy there either.
Yeah.
Then the Atlantic slave trade. That's probably something we all have no way too little about. And you even earned a Primetime Emmy along the way. So congratulations. But you've also used your documentary lens as you worked on Hollywood's Imagined Worlds, The Iron Giant, Mission Impossible, and Marvel's Werewolf by Night. And so while you're joining us virtually today, we hope to see you here in person next spring. And Anthony, I did note your work on Star Trek, Secrets of the Universe. So I'm going to prioritize being here the whole time when you're there because I need to talk to you about Star Trek.
Okay.
Oh, finally. It's so nice to have somebody want to talk about Star Trek instead of Star Wars.
Instead of Star Wars, yes.
So glad.
Yes.
Two different worlds. Two different worlds. No, truly, we'll be honored to have you on campus. But that's something we'll talk about some more. Today is really panel discussion. There's been a conversation about some of the things we want to talk to you about, or you want to talk to us about. And I'm going to hand over to Michelle to lead that discussion and sit down and listen with great interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you so much.
I'm leading. We're just going to chit chat, right, guys? Just like we did a few days ago. Thank you so much for being here. This is amazing. I met Terence. When did I meet you? It was like 2 years ago? No, you came for the symposium here on campus, right? And I remember.
Yeah, I think it was 3 years ago.
Oh, it was 3, yeah.
Yeah.
And we escaped to Legend. It was supposed to be a 10 minutes discussion, and we ended up brainstorming for almost 3 hours to the chagrin of the organizers. And then they were saying, where is Terence, right? So they haven't forgiven me for that. But anyway, and then we went to the VIEW conference in last year. And this is where I met Anthony.
Yeah.
And it was an amazing, you hosted an amazing dinner at that 1-star Michelin restaurant in an amazing place. And I don't know, we connected with Anthony in a way that I had never done before. And so thank you, Terence, for the introduction. It was amazing.
Yeah.
And then the next day, Terence was giving a talk on
Yeah.
you know what he had done about Colette. And I don't think I ever said that to Anthony, but in the program, it was Medal of Honor. And I thought naively he was receiving a Medal of Honor from the view.
Video game.
So
Yeah.
you can imagine my surprise when I came to the session and he was talking about Colette and veteran stuff, you know, and I was like, what's going on? And then quickly I realized that it was about a video game, and I felt like, oh my God. I'm so sorry. Wow. It was amazing. And since then we have kept you know, communication. It's amazing. We have an exchange, not exchange program yet, but we got 2 summers in a row, interns from your school.
That's right.
They're absolutely amazing to work with, you know, project here on campus with faculty, in coordination with the studio led by
Right.
Dancer American Campus. So it has been amazing, you know, coordination of effort here. And so today I'm super excited to have you both helping us navigate the intricacy of the landscape of AI, especially when it comes to creativity. So maybe I ask both of you to, one at a time, obviously, not at the same time, right? To talk about perhaps your perspective on AI, teaching, and creativity. Who wants to start? Terence?
Well, maybe I'll segue into how Anthony got in
Yeah.
to SVA. We're so lucky. Boy, yeah, where to start? And I'm glad you mentioned it is worth lingering on that we have a great relationship with UIUC and CTIL on many different levels. And I'm really happy for this invitation. So thank you for that. And we're going to continue in the spring. It's been extremely helpful and fruitful for me personally, some of our staff and our students. But yeah, so I'm not a career academic, although now I've been teaching for almost 20 years, I guess. But I come from a production background, always using, you know, from the late 80s into the 90s when computer graphics itself was really just being invented from scratch, and using all those new innovation technologies when 3D printing was first conceived of as stereolithography. You know, I used that in 1993, motion capture at the birth of that, again, more than 35 years ago. So I've been fortunate to be old enough to have seen a lot of these technological creative artist tool revolutions that have come and been disruptive, right? I think that's the accurate word, disruptive in a literal sense. And then calmed down and then exploded the industry and been just wonderful things. So all these LLM and machine learning and AI tools is just, I'm giddy. I'm just so excited because it's the possibilities are just absolutely incredible. So the segue is, so needless to say, I'm very pro. I'm very, very excited about the possibilities that all of these tools are going to afford our students as they become filmmakers in the real world. I'm going to be starting my 10th year here as chair at SVA. And I'm also very lucky at SVA to be able to quickly iterate new courses and you know, pedagogy and all this. So I'll do a quick segue to Anthony. That it was at least 2 years ago, I think. We just, you know, we had mutual friends and we had lunch, and one of our lunches, this came up because Anthony had, he can talk more like a chat group with his filmmaker friends, and some were very terrified and angry, and some were more curious about these new tools. You know, putting words in your mouth, but and I said, well, it's funny. I want to introduce some new courses here at SVA at the graduate level. Would you be interested in teaching filmmaking with these tools? And you admitted you basically didn't really know them at all, except in a very basic way. I said, perfect, because nobody does. So that's the first thing for your audience, Michelle, is that it's a very new paradigm in teaching where I think the delta, you know, the difference between the knowledge of most instructors and the knowledge of most students is really close. And it's very exciting, which Anthony can talk about, you know, to be learning, be open with the students and be learning in parallel. So that's basically, Anthony took me up on my risky invitation, and we had a blast. I'll stop talking now. I'll say we had a blast. I'll speak for both. Just discovering, you know, processes along the way and things that it could do and we didn't know, and things that it didn't do so well. And our mutual friend Rochelle Gluer helped with the technology side of this a little bit. But that's basically how Anthony came into our fold, and he's set to teach that course for the second time this coming spring.
That the chat group is called, because it's it's a little less active now, but
Oh, you
but
and your friends?
yeah, but it's called AI friend, foe, or future. Yeah, and so it did. Yeah, it did start as kind of like this big worry session among filmmaker and writer friends. Like, what the heck is this? What's going on? Did you see this? And it would be then, and I mean, I haven't done this, but it would be interesting to go back and look at the original links, because we did this like shortly after ChatGPT went public. With their model was like around Christmas time, or yeah, and so it was at first kind of scary, but then also I was really fascinated by it. Like, one of the first things I asked it to do, because I was just very curious, I ended up, just using it for absurdist things. I said, give me a story about, how planet Earth all of a sudden turns into a pizza. And it was very basic, but actually I couldn't believe it. I was just like, this is crazy. I mean, this is going to really, this might impact negatively, I think, what I do. But then as we sort of went on, and then I met Terrence for that lunch, probably not that long after that or so. I just thought, I don't really know. I'm not going to stand in front of a class and try to pretend I know, or am an expert at something. But when Terrence said that, no, that's, you're pretty much in line with most students, then I thought, okay, that's fine. That sounds actually kind of fun. I think you used the word sandbox. Like, this will be kind of you play around with this and see these tools. Yeah. So, but I have a documentary background, and mostly or primarily in history-based films. So I just started immediately thinking about, okay, so how could this help us imagine the past, or give us things that I know were there but we don't really have a visual record of. And but if we were to do that, how could we do that really accurately? So that's what I really started getting very interested in, and I had been working on, so since 2005, the documentation, and I'll show a little bit of this. It sort of is a passion project of mine, one of those projects that will not let go of me. And it is about an Italian immigrant who became a police detective in the NYPD, who was murdered in Sicily in 1909. His murder was never solved, but he was the head of the Italian squad, and he fought the early mafia in New York. And he did so at a time when Italians really weren't very welcome here in this country at the height of the immigration. So it's like an immigration story. It's a crime story. It's an unsolved, it's a story that I love. However, I just never had success getting, the gatekeepers to sort of float money. Yeah. And say, hey, okay, let's make that movie. And I was just talking about a documentary about him. I really wanted to tell his story. And it just, as Terrence and I and Rochelle, as we were just kind of sitting around talking about what this class could be, and I'm really like thinking to myself, I mean, for me, I really want to keep it documentary. Like it was, I think it was in the one of our meetings, it just hit me. I was like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I wonder if we could like bring him back to life, animate him, do an interview with him. That would be
in this office on that whiteboard.
Yeah, exactly. There's it right there. I was like, oh, that actually, yeah. And then I started like getting really excited. I thought, could we do this? So then the class was about not only getting your hands dirty with these tools and getting to use them, but I wanted to structure it around something. So I said, let's tell his story, or let him tell his story.
Yeah.
And the students had to do, research on him. I took them on walking tours twice. Our first class actually was I met them down in Little Italy, and I gave them a walking tour of all the spots where he lived and where the police headquarters were at that time, different cases. And we were on site, like we were doing all the things you would do.
Research.
Yeah, research if you were making a documentary. But then, the students were able to, and we had used pretty much exclusively Runway at that time. They were able to sort of, I had asked them all to try to animate a couple, I have, images of him. And one student did it the best. Somehow he figured it out, and then he became the main person to animate Petrosino. But the thing is, and then we tried voices, and I was like, I don't know if he has an accent like that. But at that time, it really wasn't that great. The voices, which then said, well, this is like 1910, 1909, this should be a silent film. So we actually made it a silent film. So anyway, we made this film. Runway wrote about it. It was really great. Members of the Petrosino family actually came to class to watch it. And then it just got me thinking about how I might tell the story, myself. Maybe this is the way to go, telling a story. So doing the class wasn't, I don't think, educational only for the students, but for me, it really opened up my own view on how this could be used for filmmaking. And let me just say one more thing before we sort of move on, because one of my big takeaways, and I told you that I had wanted to tell the story for a long time. I had approached, the History Channel, and they're like, no, and PBS wasn't interested. And at one point I even, went to Netflix, no. And it wasn't until recently that, when I was asked, well, aren't you afraid AI is going to take your job? Right? And it just hit me that I was like, wait a minute. And this was to a group of people, that I just showed this first episode of this film to. That I was like, wait, we just sat and watched this. I did this. I said, the History Channel was the one who took my job, and PBS took my job, like by saying no, they don't want to do it. So that the gatekeeper was saying no. They were the ones, and now, sort of, I have access to a way to do this on my own in a way that I never could have anyway, before. So I see it as a kind of an exploder in a way of I know it's disruptive, but I do think that it's also it just puts in the hands of individuals.
I hope we can talk more about that, Michelle. Because making art and films and stories and creative content exists that never would exist otherwise. It's just, right?
Actually, this is a perfect segue in one of the questions I had prepared for you guys, for us, or for everybody in the room, which is for artists and filmmakers, where do you draw the line between creative collaboration with AI and creative outsourcing with AI? And I think your work, Anthony, is spot on here to talk about that stuff, right? So maybe I turn to you first. No offense, Terrence.
That's all right. I'm enjoying. I'm just sit back.
I think that probably the most the most content that people see is creative outsourcing. The stuff that you see on like Reels and
they call it AI slop now.
Yeah, AI stuff like that is creative outsourcing.
AI what?
Very AI slop. Yeah.
AI slop. That's a new phrase, Michelle. That's what the kids are saying today. It's TikTok. It's kitties riding bicycles and cats.
Yeah. Although that cat with that jacket, that was pretty funny. I will say yes. Like that was good. But most of it is, I think, creative outsourcing. And look, if Sora has this new app, and you can make the stuff there, and my feeling is if that's what Sora is and that's what that media platform is, then that's what it is. I mean, like, people are just making these videos and you go there and you know
Right.
what you're getting. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. You want to do that and you want to have it there, okay. But that stuff is starting to leak into, like, you know, Reels and Instagram and all of that. Now it's kind of, it's all over the place. And I think that creative outsourcing is pushing people, maybe, I hope, to sort of think, well, you know, I wanted this platform because I just sort of wanted to discover new things or people or see something funny, and it's not even real. Like, why am I doing this? What am I look like? Like, that made sense to me on Sora's app, but now if it's so the creative outsourcing, I think, and I don't want to call it like lazy and stuff. I mean, some of it certainly is, but
No.
but some of it is, but I think it is a thing. It's kind of like, you know, some people are doing it. Now, the other one was the collaborator, you were saying?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, that's, to me, you know, that's what gets me kind of upset when you are pegged. Like, if you use this in some way that, oh, you didn't really like work on that.
Right. Or you're lazy. Or the
Yeah,
computer-
or you're lazy, because it is an incredible tool, like an assistant, to walk you through things, whether that be, in my case, for example, After Effects, which I knew nothing about, beyond like looking and say, like, I don't want to touch this, looks insane and impossible, but it walked me through. ChatGPT, I would say, showed me how to use the basics of it, or even Blender, right? Which I have no business using or even trying, but it walked me through, right? So I started to see that, oh, this is like my my assistant, you know, now my assistant who like knows everything. But everything for me when I'm using it is really, because of the historical documentary work that I like to do, is sourced. It comes from original archives. It's helping me give a visual sense to the documentation that is already there, but it's maybe, you know, in paper form, or it was, you know, just an interview in a newspaper, you know, somewhere. And I really love sort of working in that original material and sort of trying to visually create it with the help of AI. And I have an example of that to show whenever you're ready. I know Terrence may want to say something first, or I'm not sure. Terrence, do you want to like sort of jump?
Well, yeah, let me
question?
interject
Go ahead.
a little bit. Yeah, it's because you're right. The two areas, I'm glad you brought those up as two distinct areas. With me teaching the graduate students, it really is the moment of discovery of an assistant to basically help you ideate quicker. That's basically how I help you get along out of the wet matter, you know, out of the gray up here, just out of your head, to be able.
In your hair? Oh, sorry.
My hair. Yeah. Get it out of my hair. But really, you know, get it on the paper, so to speak, and get it in front of you and your colleagues to then iterate and change. And it so radically speeds that up. And by now, even it's I mean, all of this stuff iterates on a weekly basis. So,
Yeah.
you know, even months ago, the very real discussion of ethics and sourcing and you know, artist rights, and, you know, having it plagiarizes, steal work of others basically without giving credits, you know, scraping databases and the entire internet and all that. Every professional studio for quite some time now, not only because of legal reasons, but because of the right moral ones, they only use fully licensed, locked down, or internally trained sources for these things. So your students and people in the audience listening to say, you know, AI is evil because it steals artist work. Well, the older models and the public models may do, but any professional tool that's being used today does not. I mean, I just went to this amazing festival people should look up called the Infinity Festival in LA. Thanks again to our mutual friend Rochelle Glure was invited to moderate a panel there on some filmmakers, and they all said that. They said absolutely not. We self-train our own models with our own our own films, our own work, licensed content. So that issue is really behind us in a large sense. Yeah, and then the other part is the finished work. So from a student standpoint, from a teaching standpoint, we literally treat it under the same ethics umbrella as plagiarism and our normal rules, right? So we're just telling students, we actively encourage the research and experimentation of this stuff. Just talk about it. Just tell us that you're using it and how you used it. And then we can both decide in collaboration, how much of that finished work, is actually generated raw through these engines or not. And in the vast majority of cases, it's more on the front end, like Anthony was saying, used in research, used in the ideation process, used as an art department, used as an assistant to get you through the very time-consuming manual stuff, and then get on to the higher level thinking. And that goes across for writing and for music and certainly for programming. Vibe coding is the big deal now that's incredibly successful. Again, I encourage people to read currently what's coming out like this week and not even last summer, because it's so radically different how good these tools are at all this stuff. So
Great.
yeah, and I can steal another 30 seconds. I can share.
Yeah.
I can share my
Go
screen
ahead,
really
go ahead.
quick. I'll just show a couple. I'm going to show a couple of slides here.
Go ahead.
See if that works. You can see this now, right?
Yeah.
Secret
Yep.
Knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I love showing this book because I remember reading this. This is at least 25 years old now. This what we're going through right now is not new at all. So I mentioned when I was coming up. Well, I'll get back to that, but if anyone doesn't know David Hockney as an artist, you should. If you don't know his book, Secret Knowledge, you should read it. He basically proved definitively that with the advent of new technologies, this is in the 1500s, mirrors, lenses, camera obscura, of course, the artists of the day used it, Caravaggio and of course, Da Vinci, they all use these new technology tools to help their art. And it's just evident from the work at the time. And much later, 400 years later, the invention of photography, right? I use this a lot as an example. A quote from I don't know if this was the New York Times at the time, talking about basically, no one's going to paint anymore. Now that this camera has been invented, who's going to paint? Painters are going to go out of work. It's going to, put everybody out of a job.
Yeah.
In the 1900s. And then again, I graduated high school in 84. I went to college to study art. And then in 85, this thing came out. And I immediately pivoted, and the same discussions were going on. My fine art, my BFA instructors were saying, this is cheating. You can't use a tool like a computer. It's doing the work for you. It's going to put graphic designers out of work. It's going to do everything automatically. Obviously, the industry exploded, and it did it opposite like that. So I just wanted to mention that really quick, along with, most recently with filmmaking. Again, just to segue back to Anthony, all my friends at Pixar, the co-founders and people who when Toy Story came out, none of the headlines mentioned the storytellers and the writers and the artists and the animators. It all said movie created by computers, movie created by computers. And it lasted for years, and it drove those brilliant filmmakers crazy because everybody thought you just push a button, make computer animated movie. So back to you, Anthony. Maybe
I mean that's a great sort of segue into this. Nothing could be further from the truth. Although I will say the reason why people might think that now is because with tools like Sora, you can type, give me a cat caught on a Ring camera with a shotgun, and a person coming out saying "bad kitty," and it can do that for you. So in some ways but that is not all that this technology does, and you can be extremely detailed with it. I find it actually, when people say that, I mean, I find it incredibly frustrating sometimes. Like, I do, make people make jokes about this, but it is true. Sometimes I think, like, why in the world are they calling this intelligent? This is like like this is the stupidest thing ever,
Yeah.
that you cannot understand that I'm saying it. Just do not move the camera. Stop
Right.
moving the camera. Yeah.
Or six fingers and
Yes. It's so. Anyway, but the question or the segue I was talking about was that maybe I could show you it, just like it's like 3 minutes and 30 seconds, but I think it's good to watch, because then I can show you the process, and we can go under the hood a little bit of my own thing. So maybe if you want to show it there, it's easier. I think I guess it's easier if you stream it there. And then we can. I'll show you some slides. I'll just start by saying this is, my take on the Petrosino story, the Joe Petrosino story I told you about earlier.
Oh, they're going with sound.
Yeah, there should be sound. There is sound.
We can hear it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's online.
Okay, so yeah. So that just is the beginning of the of thing it's about 9 minutes long. that night, and I imagine it sort of as a series. There's like I see like 5 seasons, like 5 episodes a season, and it's going to tell his whole story. It starts there in 1903, Barrow Murder. So, how did I do it? So I'm just going to share my screen, and just to give you a sense of sort of the accuracy, the historical accuracy that I wanted to bring to this. So in my research, so that is the case that Petrosino went to Sing Sing prison. That was all taken from multiple newspaper accounts of Petrosino's visit to the prison, because after the body was found, an anonymous letter sent Petrosino to Sing Sing to talk to the murdered man's brother-in-law. So I found a picture of Sing, and at first I thought, okay, that's great. But then I was like, well, maybe it'd be probably better if it was at night, and it was April, so I imagined it was raining, so I just asked, and it was just kind of on a whim. I just thought I dropped this into ChatGPT, and now just to give you a sense of timeline. So this is like April and May of this, of this past year. And I said, hey, what if I needed this to be, in April, and this is what it did for me. And I was kind of like, and I just sort of was like, couldn't believe it. I mean, it wasn't like some grand plan of mine. I was like, oh, this is really great. I could probably use this still to animate. So I had a shot inside the prison also. And then with Photoshop, I removed the men standing there. And I asked it to sort of match, sort of, if the outside looked like this, what would it look like inside at the same time, right? So that is inside Sing Sing. These gentlemen might recognize that hallway if we could bring them here. This is the murder victim himself. These are photographs from the newspaper, and I use these, and I believe this I brought into Midjourney. Which gave me the murder victim. And interestingly, at first when I was doing it, it would not do it for me. It was like, this violates our rules, basically, we're not doing murdered people. So I was like, okay, he's sleeping. And then it just did it for me. So anyway, there's yeah, well, this one was Midjourney did that for me, so yeah. There's our hero Petrosino. I think he looks pretty good, this one was done on ChatGPT. And this is where it gets real, as if none of it was, but this is an actual shot of the street. This is 11th Street, and then Avenue D is right here, and 743 East 11th Street is where the barrel was found. Now, I found this image at the New York Public Library, and I was interested in it because of just the texture of the street, right? But I need it for my thing. I was like, oh, I need the camera on the other side, like maybe where this carriage is. I wanted a shot from here looking this way. So this wasn't helping me. So I found 1903 fire insurance maps from the New York City. And this large gas holder right here, you can see is this thing right here. Just to give you a sense of the space, that picture was taken from about right here. The barrel was here. And then I mentioned before Blender. I just opened up Blender, and I opened up ChatGPT, and I was like, hey, look, this is what I want to do. These are my maps. I need to make a 3D model of these. And it's great because these have dimensions, and the colors mean different types of materials. It understood that. And then you can then, well, if you know Blender, you can bring that's sort of as I'm starting to model it. And then I was able to bring it, the camera that's the angle I wanted. And I made a little barrel. And then I took this image and I brought it into ChatGPT to make that, right? Again, saying this is your reference. Now I need it. And then this, I added that on there. So I could have just said, hey, give me a street, you know, in New York City, it's foggy, it's this, but I didn't feel, for me, that would have been accurate and right to have done. So, you know, that's how I ended up that. This you'll see just later on. Just to give you a couple more examples. This is where the murder took place, police believe. That's a photograph in the paper. This one was done, I did this one in Sora. I think I actually animated that one in Sora. Again, back in April, when, by the way, I'd say I hated Sora so much, especially their video stuff, because it would always just sort of end up making some modern crazy thing. That's the Barrow murderer victim's house. And then just lastly, this is our main bad guy. That's him. That's an actual picture of him, Giuseppe Morello. I thought that did a great job. That one was done on references in Runway. And I had such success with references, I thought, with some of my stuff that I'm still considering maybe I'm going to give up my Midjourney account. Yeah. But that's, so just to give you a sense, I think that's maybe helpful to sort of see the depth that I went to go. So it certainly is not just a push the button and go kind of.
It's a lot harder than people think.
Yeah, it's a lot harder if you want to be accurate and stuff. So, yeah.
Any question from anyone?
Yeah, I do. So what's the implication for teaching? Again, you mentioned that you had the course and students did similar documentaries. Like, what are the skills that you as an instructor focus on? How do you balance how to pick the tool, how to use the tool, but also, I mean, you come with that documentary background, you know how important it is to go to those original sources, and you're bridging the gap of taking those sources and using them creatively to create a new style of documentary, a new type of documentary.
Well, I found that what was really interesting, and so for that class, we did a film as a group, and I thought, oh, you know, we could find out who's going to be our editor, who's going to be, you know, sort of our character person, someone will do sets and all of that. It was new, so I thought maybe we should do it that way. We would treat it. So what I found was that people and students who had a very strong already artistic background were just really wonderful with these tools. Like these tools really, I mean, they were able to take to them, you know, unlike I think anybody who just sort of was starting out at the beginning. So if I realized that if someone had a background in film or storytelling, set design, character animation, they were great with these things. So that was a big thing. So, you know, I kind of already felt that this Runway and all of these things were sort of being, I think, marketed to the masses. But the people who seem to have been excelling, at least in my view, were artists already. People who had that, you know. So I was trying to explain and position these as, you know, tools to help you, just another tool to help you, you know, create what you want to create.
Well, and I'll step in on that too, to say that it's a reason why I encourage our faculty to constantly remind our students about the critical importance of the fundamentals.
Right.
And this is a whole discussion about, well, you know, if AIs can just program, you know, software engineering, what are you going to be teaching software engineers? But everyone said, no, you still got to learn the basics, the fundamentals. Same thing with art. In order to make this stuff look good, you've got to know color theory and composition and cinematography and layout and architecture and just all these fundamental things to know. I mean, it sounds trite, but to know what to prompt. But
it is so true. Yeah, it is absolutely true. Because I will even say, even within the newspaper archives that I work in, that I'm using to tell these stories, these are like Italian language and English language that reported on this murder and the subsequent trial and all that stuff. I will tell you, and if you don't know that in and out already, the thing makes mistakes all the time. Like where I'll say, hey, can you just give me a list of who were the suspects? You know, I just wanted to have the suspects. They met, and I'm constantly finding, you know, like, so you can't really trust it actually. It's great to sort of help you organize things and move things around, certainly to help create imagery and whatnot. But you really should be the master of whatever that project is you're doing before you bring these tools on board.
How are we doing, Michelle?
Fantastic. I had a bunch of questions, but you're answering them before I can even ask them. To perhaps continue on your, amazing conversation here. I have one question, and I guess we kind of touched on it a little bit 2 days ago, but in a world where AI can tailor every image, video, or narrative to individual preferences, what happened to our sense of shared reality? In other words, we discuss about, are we entering an era of truth silos? How do you
I kind of feel like we already are in our truth silos.
Yeah, that's true. Definitely on social media.
Yeah, to some extent. I think maybe people will, when they start making their own stuff, maybe a lot of people will say, well, maybe I'm not that good at, you know what I mean? Like it kind of, it bores me, or, whatever. I want to sort of go out and see the things that are being created by creators. At least that's maybe my hope.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned this a couple of days ago, Anthony, when we were talking. The more that this set of tools becomes much more easy to use, much more ubiquitous, so everybody can just press a button and make something that's completely indistinguishable from reality. Maybe that's a good thing, because then they'll question to say, that means everything I see could be fake. So maybe that will have an inadvertent positive effect to make people wake up a little bit.
Yeah, I agree with that. I hope
maybe that's assuming most intelligence, most Americans are more intelligent than that, and maybe that's a wrong assumption for at least 39% of our population.
Yeah. Well, I believe, I actually do believe that more people see this stuff, it's a good thing, because they, now the question would be like, will they continue just to retreat into those spaces that they just believe anyway? I don't know. But if you're talking about a creative sense, though, also, Michelle, I think people will quickly understand, if it's in the hands of, people who maybe are trained in storytelling.
Very good.
And some who are not. Maybe that's just my hope.
And so can you talk about what kind of evidence would you be looking for in terms of assessing what students learn in that creative space? So Terence, your students, when you ask them to do stuff, what is it you're going to be looking for in terms of evidence that it's their work, even if they use AI as a AI agent to help them, right? You see what I mean? What are you looking for?
Yeah, well, I can kind of parse that in two different ways. One is the kind of pedantic, plagiarism aspect of it. And there's tools out there to just simply detect. So that's fairly straightforward from a, did they use it or not, and then, depending on the class, does that constitute cheating or not? I'm much more interested in the learning process up here.
Right.
Yeah, to basically, because we're so open about its use and encourage its use, and we see it in classes like Anthony, but others, we see them using it at every step of the way, or avoiding its use, which, in a very small number of cases, students are very passionate about not using it, which is totally fine. But yeah, so no, I loved seeing it in the case of, it's actually fairly common. I just reviewed all 43 of our new first year graduate students, and some of them are absolutely brilliant at everything. They're going to completely change the world because they're just these savant, incredible, amazing people. Most of them, like myself, are not like that. They have brilliant sparks, but they're not brilliant at everything. That's more common. And that's what I love to see when I see them use these tools, and I see them using these tools to get to kind of leapfrog over their weak points. Meaning, one person just got up and literally said, well, I can't draw, but I know color theory and composition, and I love doing background layout design and all that. So they use techniques like Anthony showed. You know, they'll build up simple models, and they'll know exactly the vision of what they want. And instead of hiring an art team or raising money to hire partners to do this, they use these tools to basically leapfrog these weak points in their creative process. And I think that's a beautiful thing, because then they feel empowered. They don't feel anxiety, depression, of getting stuck at these points that they just can't get beyond. And again, they just see it as Photoshop. It's just another tool that helps them. Like I started using the Mac to use graphic design 30 years ago. So
yeah. I wanted to say if I would just kind of add on just a little bit to that, because Terrence, I don't know. Yeah, I know you said that there's a tiny sliver of people who, or maybe students, are refusing to use this.
a couple.
Yeah, there are a couple, and I know some people like that. But I think for me, my question to people who have that stance, and it's fine, it's totally fine if you do. But my question is to them. I said, hey, imagine if you were advising some young kid from, I don't know, Idaho or Texas or Mexico, Turkey, doesn't matter, who literally has no connections, no money, doesn't really have any support, but all of a sudden has this amazing tool that could help him or her.
And they have the desire.
Yeah, and the desire to sort of express themselves, and this is the story that I want to do. I make the argument that they should not do that. What is your argument to them?
Right.
And it's very hard for them to say, right, well, I mean, what's the argument? You should be hiring an artist to do this because that's the way that we've been doing it. It's so that's really always what it comes down to for me. It's hard to make that argument. When I hear that argument, then I'll start listening.
I do have a question as a communicator. How would you define storytelling? Because you talk about filmmaking, you talk about using these AI tools and the foundations that you need. So how would you define, given the new age and the future, storytelling?
Well, I think in the simplest ways, I think it's going to be human driven forever. At least for the foreseeable future. That's the one thing. Anthony said this earlier. It's not intelligent. It's not AI.
No,
it's just not. It's the human touch is going to become more valuable in this whole ecosystem, because the polished, the fake, the AI slop, the stuff that has no soul, it's going to be prolific and obvious. So the stories, are going to come from boys and girls all around the world in little communities that have no other outlets. It's going to be their creative spark. So I think the storytelling aspect is going to remain human. That's the short version.
Yeah, I agree with Terrence there. And also, I mean, until the day comes that the computer prompts the person to say, "Hey, come on, give me an idea so I can write something." I think I do think we're safe.
And it's not just the original, the original story idea. It's also the process. Again, speaking, and Paul Trillo is a great example of an AI filmmaker that we've had talk at SVA, and it's he'll have an idea, and it'll be way beyond the scope of budget and time and resources to manifest, but by hiring a great cinematographer, production designer, choreographer, and real actors on a single stage, you can act out and bring to life the spark of this idea, and then use these tools to finish it off. Basically, art directed by real people through the story from a real person, driven by real actors with a real choreographer. So all of the elements of the whole pipeline is all human driven. So soapbox. Great question, though.
Michelle, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Anthony, thanks, Terrence. Anthony, I noticed the Beat Street poster. Where's your Breakin' and Electric Boogaloo poster?
Probably over there.
Yeah. I
Breaking in.
Yeah. I worked on Breakin' in the early 80s. It's a long story.
Did you really?
Yeah. But I
It's-
wanted to shout out to another of your short films that's just beautiful, Unclassified.
Oh,
The-
David McReynolds.
Yeah, your friend, and I encourage everybody to see it.
Yeah.
And so that's a beautiful film. It's you with a camera and your friend in this amazing New
I'm gonna
York.
put it in the, I'll put it in the chat. You can continue.
you.
Thank you.
And it's just bookish, intellectual, bachelor pad, and it's just so simple and old school. So I guess my question to you is, I'm
Yeah.
hoping you'll continue to make movies like that. In the
Oh, yeah.
future.
Oh,
But
okay.
also, if you did another movie with David and you utilized AI, is that a possibility too, I guess?
Oh, sorry. Hold on. I'm like, what's happening? It's playing on my headphones. I just put it there in the chat. Well, thank you. So, unfortunately, David Mcreynolds, he died in 2018.
Yeah.
So he's been gone for a while. David McReynolds was a good friend of mine. He was the first openly gay man to run for president. He ran on the Socialist Party ticket in 1980. His VP was a Catholic nun. And I've always wanted to tell the story of that, because I just think that would be like a great movie. I think David actually would be really fascinated with AI. I think he would have been he loved technology and stuff like that. So he would have been cool. So I'm glad you asked that, because no, of course I have, in fact, I'm working on something right now that is not AI based in any way. That's going to be interviews with people, going out to location, filming, heavily archival, actual archival. So I am not staking out some space as an AI filmmaker. I think that it's going to be great to do this Petrosino project. If someone watches that and says, "Hey, why aren't we doing something bigger than that?" Then I'm going to listen, to you. No, it just feels like it's broadened my thinking and horizons and abilities, in the filmmaking world. But I'm not putting down cameras or ideas in actual documentaries by any stretch. But I'm glad you asked that, because I guess that can be the impression that people might have, and I would like to see a world in which where it's fine if that's what you want to make something in using this these tools, that's fine, or you want to do it this way, that's great too.
Awesome.
And I'm glad you watched Unclassified.
Yeah, no, it's a great film.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank
I
you.
have so many other topics of interest, but we are reaching the 3 p.m. mark. So the one I can't believe we have been chit-chatting for an hour already. In the interest of the time of the folks here and online, I'd like to say thank you very much for that amazing conversation. This was extremely insightful and inspirational. But I don't want to end this way. I have a few questions, actually, very easy question. Anthony, the guy, the young filmmaker in your movie, it's you, right?
Yeah, it's what? Yes.
Recognize you.
So, well, okay, yeah. I forgot to show that slide. Let me just show you quickly. Yeah. Darn it. Thanks for reminding me.
No, it's one way to make sure to say that.
Yes,
that
that was me. Yeah. So that is me at around 20 years old. So I used that to create my time traveling self.
Okay.
To go back.
Right. And the second question is, you talked about L'Occhio di Cacano, right? And you have that wonderful opening slide with the castle, perhaps one of the oldest Norman castle in Sicily. Is that for a specific reason?
Hey, how did you know that's in Caccamo? But how did you? That is the oldest Norman castle in Sicily. Yes, of course.
It's because
that's where my family comes from. Yeah. Well,
okay.
it's at the Eye of Caccamo. That was just sort of a personal thing. That was my father's family they're all from Caccamo.
So it seems to me that in that realm, you have done a lot of work in terms of making sure you have factual accuracy, right? You
Yeah.
spend a lot of time in New York, in the library, the archive, and all that stuff. But also you bring some level of emotional authenticity, right? And perhaps I'd like to finish with, if we can go a couple of minutes more, asking the question, which one, how do you, for the both of you, emotional authenticity, factual accuracy, where do you position them in your work? Which one is
Yeah.
higher than the other?
We're kind of very different in that sense, I think, because I came up, as was mentioned, Star Wars movies, Jurassic Park,
Right.
visual effects, so I made a living out of making things fake that were
Yeah.
very, very obviously fake. And I would love to have had, introducing Jar Jar to the world. Sorry about that. So the
You can in the spring.
So I've always been, and even again back in the 90s, I was never interested in the very necessary trajectory of achieving photorealism. That was a big part of research, of teaching, of production. I always wanted to see fanciful, to your point. I wanted to see things that have never before been visualized by the human mind. I wanted to see something that was never seen before. And we did a lot of that in computer graphics. And I believe very strongly that these new tools are going to do the same thing. We're going to see things, we're going to see films, we're going to see art, poetry, music. We're going to see and hear and read things that have never been experienced before. That's what excites me.
Wow.
Great. Anthony, the last word?
Well, yeah. I think that in those kind of moments, if it's truthful, right? There's a part in the film which you didn't see. It was right after where we see the street there, where the woman says, I lifted the coat off of the barrel and I saw this person inside and there was blood all over, and then she says, and then there's a big title. It says, "It still haunts my dreams." And then there's a shot where the camera pushes in on the barrel. It's dark, and then the head appears. And then his eyes open and looks at the camera.
Yeah.
Now, that obviously didn't happen to her. He was dead. His head was almost severed in real life. However, as I was making this, trying to put this together, the stupid thing kept opening his eyes in the barrel. And I couldn't get it to not open his eyes in this barrel. And I was just like, what is, and then I thought, because I was like, I'm not making a dream here. And then I thought, oh, wait a minute. Maybe I can, the way she describes it is that I still see this in my dreams. Now, I don't know if she ever dreamed about that. Maybe, but it kind of worked for the mood of and it felt truthful to me.
Yeah, okay.
So it's in there. But I will also say, I'm not sure, quite honestly, if this is a documentary or if this is some kind of a hybrid.
I see. Very good. Well, thank you so much, guys.
Yeah.
It was very insightful. I'd like to tell the audience that in the spring semester, we're going to host, CITL will be hosting you either for 1 or 2 days, and we're going to have fun with everybody on campus. I don't have the details yet, but thank you so much for coming to visit us in the spring semester, and I will make sure that we have an amazing 2 days event with you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And thank you
I was going to say,
to everybody. Thank you.
yeah, thank you all for having us. And I saw Terrence dropped his email in the chat, so did I.
Yep. If anyone wants to get in touch. Thanks. See everybody.
Happy Halloween.
Thank you.